You know, it might be hard to believe and honestly even harder to remember, but there was a period of time from the early to mid 80s to the early to mid 2000s where the Miami Hurricanes were at or near the top of the college football world almost every single year. They have 5 national titles. They put a ton of players into the NFL, set records for winning streaks, some all-time classic games against Florida State and Notre Dame. We all remember a lot of those games. Been watching football as long as I have. That was a long time ago. Since joining the ACC 17 seasons ago, hard to believe it's been that long. Since joining the ACC 17 seasons ago, the Miami Hurricanes have a grand total of 3 bowl wins, 1 division title, and 0 conference championships. They're looking to build on a pretty good year last year, now heading into 2021. Can the Miami Hurricanes finally win the ACC? We're going to talk about that in today's video when I give you a preview and a game-by-game prediction for the 2021 Miami Hurricanes. Let's go. Oh yeah, good morning, that is Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right, it's me, Uncle Lou. And guess what? I'm live for you on LouTube today. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it also, and in addition to that as well, hey, subscribe to this channel if you're not already. Did you know I post college football videos almost every single day of the year? It's true, and some of them are even watchable. I don't know about this one. You can let me know in the comment section down below at the end of this video whether you think this one's watchable or not. We are in the middle of our prediction videos for 2021. I've done 4 or 5 of these already. There's a playlist on the channel called 2021 Predictions. Just click that playlist and it'll bring up a list of all the teams I've done so far. Get a lot of questions about which teams I'm doing or which teams I'm doing next or whatever. Just like every year, every team that I predict is going to come as a suggestion off of my Patreon page. There's a link in the description of this video that'll take you to the Patreon page. You can look around and you decide you want to get signed up. You'll see the post on there where I'm asking for suggestions for the prediction videos. Every week when I get ready to sit down and do my prediction videos, I go to the Patreon page and I write down 4, 5, 6 teams that I'm going to do that week. That's where all these teams are coming from. Let's get started with Miami. All right, per usual, I've got my copious notes here. I do all the research so you don't have to. All you've got to do is watch this 15 or 20-minute video. Miami Hurricanes. All right, let's recap what they did in 2020. They were 8-2, 8-3 after yet another bowl loss. Hard to believe the string of bad luck or just bad play that Miami's had in bowl games over the last 17 seasons since joining the ACC. They won, actually, at the time, what was called a BCS Bowl, the Peach Bowl, their first year in the ACC, I believe. Since then, they only have 2 other bowl wins. A lot of those years, they didn't even make it to a bowl game, but they've really struggled in the postseason when they've made it there. Their losses last year were against Clemson, North Carolina, and then Oklahoma State in the bowl game. Clemson, you say, okay, they're a really good team every single year. Clearly the cream of the crop in the ACC. Nothing embarrassing about losing that game on the road at Clemson. And even the UNC game, the fact that you lost, not really that big of a deal. Clemson was, North Carolina was a pretty good team last year, but it was the way you lost, right? And I'm sure Miami fans remember this game. It was the last regular season game. North Carolina rushed for over 600 yards against that Miami defense. Probably the worst performance anybody alive has ever seen from a Miami Hurricanes defense. A very embarrassing loss, 62-26. Was that at home too? Oh, rough. And then, of course, the Oklahoma State loss. Now, you can make of that what you will. With these bowl games nowadays, winning or losing, unless it's a playoff game or maybe a New Year's Six game, it's hard to put a lot of stock in a win or a loss because you got players sitting out. Motivation, of course, is a big issue for some of these lower bowl games, and that tends to be the ones that Miami shows up in. Even though they lost again this year, still an improvement over what they did the year before when they lost their bowl game to Louisiana Tech 14-0. 2 seasons ago, Miami, of course, the only bowl team to score 0 points in their bowl game. So congratulations, you only lost this year by 3. So that's a little bit of an improvement. Kind of sad to think about how good Miami used to be when I was growing up. I became a college football fan in the late 80s, really jumped into it in the 90s. So I remember Miami being a dominant program, and they were a fun team to watch. Whether you loved Miami or hated them, you definitely had an opinion. It didn't matter if you were a Miami fan or not. Everybody had an opinion on Miami back in the 90s. They were a fun team to watch. Since joining the ACC, though, they're less remembered for big wins and national titles and more remembered for losses to teams like Louisiana Tech and FIU, a string of questionable coaching hires, and really being non-competitive, at least in terms of winning the ACC, ever since they've joined it. Like I said, they did have a good year last year. They're going to look to improve on that this year. If you go back and look over the last 10 or 15 years, Miami has had a few good seasons, most notably 2017. And what tends to happen, at least lately for Miami in the last 10 to 15 years, is every good season they have has been followed by a bad season. They were, I think, 10-3 in 2017, and then ended up, I think, 6-7 in 2018, the following year. To have to avoid that kind of letdown that they've seemed to have. They've been unable really to put good seasons together back to back, looking to change that this year. Manny Diaz returns year 3 as the head coach there. Like I mentioned, his first year, 2019, they were 6-6, 6-7 after a bowl loss. 2020, last season, they were 8-2, 8-3 after a bowl loss. So looking to improve. The 3 bowl wins that Miami has since joining the ACC. So in the last 17 years, these are the bowl games Miami has won. 2004, they won the Peach Bowl. 2006, they won the MPC Computers Bowl, though. Congratulations for that. And in 2016, the world-renowned Russell Athletic Bowl. They have 1 division title, 3 bowl wins, 0 conference titles. It's time for Miami to get things turned around, and they're going to try to do that this year. And they've got a chance. They've got a chance. Now, I don't think anybody's going to really be picking Miami to win the ACC because Clemson is such a juggernaut right now. But Miami had a really good season last year. They had a really good team last year, and they get all their starters back except for 2. That's right. They only lose 2 starters off last year's team, which, as mentioned, went 8-2 in the regular season. The biggest question mark to me heading into the season for Miami is obviously the knee of D'Eriq King. If D'Eriq King is 100% healthy, I think he's a legitimate Heisman contender or at least preseason candidate. There's no guarantee he will be 100%. We'll have to see. Some players have a knee injury. They come back the next season like nothing ever happened. Other players have a knee injury. It takes the second season before they really get back to what they looked like pre-injury. No way to really know which version of D'Eriq King we're going to get. I hope we get the 100% version. Even though Georgia's my favorite team, I'm a college football fan, and I like watching exciting players play college football. And D'Eriq King, regardless of what you think about Miami, is an exciting player to watch. Let's take a look at the rest of their offense. Now, offensive coordinator Rhett Lashlee returns for his second season. This is big, especially for D'Eriq King. As a quarterback, you want to have consistency at the OC position, right? You don't want to be changing coordinators every year that you're in college. It's hard to develop a rhythm that way. Rhett Lashlee runs that more of a spread, up-tempo style of offense, which really suits D'Eriq King. Their offense was absolutely horrible in 2019. That's why they brought Lashlee in to take the offense over last year. And they did pretty good. They were 26th in the nation in scoring, 32nd in the nation in yards per game, and 39th in the nation in yards per play, all of which were huge improvements over their offensive numbers from the season before. We talked about D'Eriq King. If for some reason he's unable to go week 1, or if, God forbid, and nobody wants this to happen, he were to re-injure that knee or suffer some other injury, what does Miami's backup quarterback situation look like? Well, it's 3 freshmen. So if D'Eriq King is unable to play for any reason this season, Miami's chances of doing anything in the ACC drastically decrease, in my opinion. I think D'Eriq King, a healthy D'Eriq King, and a D'Eriq King as close to 100% as possible is really the only chance Miami has to make a run at the ACC this year. And like I said, we all want to see that happen. The running back position, they get all 3 of their primary running backs back from last year, Harris, Knighton, and Chaney Jr., all of which averaged over 4 yards per carry last season, not to mention the fact, of course, that D'Eriq King can move around when he needs to. That's going to be another issue to keep an eye on this season. How willing or able is he to take off running when he needs to versus what we saw him do pre-injury? We'll find those things out. At the wide receiver position, you get Mike Hardley back, and this is hard to believe. He could end up breaking all the Miami records for receptions in a career, total receiving yards in a career. He's been that good and that consistent while he's been there. And you also bring in a transfer from Oklahoma, Charleston Rambo. Oklahoma, like Ohio State, is a team that usually has 5, 6, or 7 really good / great wide receivers. So getting a wide receiver from Oklahoma or Ohio State, either one, is never a bad idea. He could have an immediate impact this season at the wide receiver position for Miami. And clearly, again, the production and how good these wide receivers are, or I guess a better way to put it, the numbers that these wide receivers are able to put up is going to tie directly to how well D'Eriq King is able to play and how close he is to 100%. So these are everything here on the offense really ties back to D'Eriq King. Offensive line, probably the most improved offensive line in college football if you go from 2019 to 2020 was the Miami Hurricanes offensive line. They were absolutely horrible in 2019. Gave up way too many sacks. They were fourth from worst in America in sacks per game in 2019. Huge improvement made in 2020. They gave up 1.5 sacks less per game in 2020 than they did in 2019. That's a huge improvement. That landed them around the 50 spot in terms of sacks per game. So not trying to convince anybody that it's an elite offensive line, but they're all coming back this year. So it's going to be better offensive line than it was last year. So you go back to 2 years ago, they had basically, if you look at sacks per game, the 125th best offensive line. Last year, about the 50th. If they can improve that again, then I think the offensive line will be in good shape, which should open up some holes for these running backs and give De'Aaron King some time to sling the ball around. Over on the defensive side of the ball, last season, Miami changed everything around offensively. This season, all the changes in the offseason are coming on the defensive side of the ball. They've gotten rid of their defensive coordinator, Blake Baker. They sort of demoted him. He didn't like it, so he left and took a job as a linebackers coach somewhere else. And they replaced their defensive coordinator with nobody. Here's the risk here. Manny Diaz has basically named himself defensive coordinator. He's going to be calling the plays for the defense this year. Now, I get it. He's got a defensive background. He was a really good defensive coordinator at Miami. He understands defenses and how to run them, and clearly he knows how to play call for the defensive side of the ball. It is hard to do that and be the head coach at the same time, especially on game day. We've seen other coaches try this before, defensively and offensively. In fact, if you're a Miami fan, you probably know Mark Richt likes to call his own plays sometimes. And then he made his son, and you know that whole mess that went on there, but I'm not going to get into all that. But you've had some head coaches over the years. Gus Malzahn has done this at Auburn from time to time back when he still had a job there. But that's not fair. Yeah, I know. We see this sometimes. Rarely does it work out. I'm not saying that means it won't work out for Miami, but it is a risk. When you've got a head coach that's taking on basically a second full-time responsibility, especially during the game, head coaches are responsible for a lot of decisions that get made during a game. And the more information and the more things you have clogging up your mind, the harder it is to concentrate on those decisions. When to call timeouts, when to substitute players in, whether or not to go aggressive or get conservative at the end of halves or the end of games. All different kinds of things like that come into play when you're a head coach, and Manny Diaz is going to have to deal with that and be the primary play caller for defense, as he's basically the de facto defensive coordinator at this point. You have 3 new position coaches on the defensive side of the ball too. So if there's going to be any instability, or if there's going to be sort of a learning curve on one side of the ball or the other for Miami this year, it looks like it's going to be over on the defensive side. But we'll keep an eye on that. The defense's biggest question mark, probably defensive end. You lost 3 different defensive ends to the NFL last year. You've got some young guys, and you brought a transfer in. But if you look at all the defensive ends on Miami's roster and add it up, there's a total of 2 games started by the defensive ends in college total on your roster. So very inexperienced at the defensive end position. Linebackers, you get most of those guys back, but they've got to play a whole lot better than they did last year. They were not impressive last year at all. I mean, the North Carolina game is easy to point to. Anytime you're giving up 600 and something yards rushing, it's not good for your linebackers. It's not just the North Carolina game, though. Miami's linebackers struggled multiple times last year. You get them back, they've got another year of experience, another year of coaching. You got to assume they're going to get better. The question is how much better, and will it be better enough to contend with some of the better teams within the ACC? We'll find out. I think the secondary is probably the strength of Miami's defense. They bring the guy in from Georgia, Tyreek Stevenson. He'll probably play right away. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised to see him start and play right away. He's pretty good. A lot of times when kids transfer, it's because they're not getting playing time or they think they might not start. I think Tyreek Stevenson had a good chance to, if not start, play a ton this year on Georgia's defense. So he's not one of these guys that just, we don't need him. He wasn't any good. He wasn't going to play anyway. He was going to play. He was good. So we'll see how he fits in down there in Miami, but I definitely think the secondary is the strength of the Miami defense. There you go. That's a brief breakdown of the offense and defense for Miami. Now I'm going to put the schedule up on the screen. We're going to go through it game by game, and I'm going to give you a winner and a loser for every single game. Of course, week 1, you already know this is a neutral site game in Atlanta, Mercedes-Benz Stadium against Alabama, and I've got you losing that game. That's not disrespectful. I don't know that there's any team in America that I would pick to beat Alabama in a week 1 game. Nick Saban with basically 8 months to prepare is going to be almost impossible for anyone to beat. Not impossible. Anything can happen in college football. That's why we watch the games. And I'm not saying Miami has no chance in this game. Alabama right now is about a 17 or an 18-point favorite in that game. You can decide if you think that's about right or too high or not high enough or whatever. But in terms of just winning this game outright, I have to go with Alabama here. Listen, it wouldn't hurt my feelings at all if you win this game. I would love, nothing would make me happier than to be able to laugh at Alabama fans after the first game of the season. Nothing would make me happier. But for the purposes of this video and doing an actual prediction, I've got to start you off 0-1 with a loss at that neutral site game against Alabama. Week 2, App State. Not a pushover as far as group of 5 teams go. Don't know if I would put them in the top tier of teams when you're talking about teams. If you look at last year anyway, Cincinnati, Central Florida, Boise State, Memphis, Coastal Carolina. Not sure they're in that tier, but they're in the tier below that. They're a really good group of 5 team. They're not as good as Miami, though. And Miami cannot afford to lose this game. The emotional distress of starting 0-2 with one of those losses being to App State would probably derail the entire season for Miami. And we've seen things like that happen before. If you go back to 2017, Miami started 10-0 before losing to a terrible Pitt team. And they didn't win another game the rest of the season. They finished 10-3. Don't lose to App State. I don't think you will. You're sitting in 1-1. I gave you a win there. You're 1-1 after week 2. Week 3, you have a Power 5 non-con matchup at home. Part 1 of this series was canceled last year due to the pandemic, but you get them at home this season. Michigan State is not in a good shape right now. They've got a second-year head coach in Mel Tucker, who I like, but has yet to really prove himself at all as a head coach. They were not a good team last year. I don't expect much from Michigan State in 2021. I've got you winning in week 3 at home against Michigan State, and you're sitting at 2-1. Week 4, your final non-conference game of the year, Central Connecticut State. No one watching has ever heard of this team. You will beat them. You're 3-1. All right, in week 5, you got your first ACC game against Virginia. This one's at home, and I gave you the win. I just have not been happy with Virginia. Outside of that one season when they had Bryce Perkins, was that his name? I forget the quarterback's name now. They had a couple of seasons ago that was fun to watch. Outside of that 1 year, they really haven't been able to get going. I do like their head coach, Mendenhall. I think he has exceeded expectations at Virginia, but expectations were pretty low. But Virginia should not be able to compete with you, particularly at home. I think you get a win in the ACC. You start your ACC slate out 1-0. That puts you at 4-1 overall heading into your bye week. Bye week comes at a pretty good time, almost right in the middle of the season. And in my opinion, right before your most important game of the season. Miami and North Carolina are in the same division of the ACC. Only one of them can go to the ACC title game. I don't know anybody that's picking anyone other than North Carolina or Miami to win this division. And I agree. I think it will be one of those 2 teams. Even though you have a bye week before, you got to play them on the road at North Carolina. They get their quarterback back. They lose a couple of running backs, but they get some wide receivers back. And I think this will be the best defense North Carolina has had since Mac Brown got there. I think this will be a close game. I don't expect this to get away like it did last year for Miami with the 600 and something yards rushing and getting blown out. However, I do think North Carolina beats you at home in a close one, but you could win this game. And I'm going to be honest, you play at North Carolina and then home against NC State. I think you go 1-1 in those 2 games. Maybe you beat North Carolina and then lose to NC State. I don't know. I have you losing to North Carolina because I think they're a little bit better than NC State, and you play them on the road, whereas NC State you get at home. So that's going to be your second loss here, according to my predictions. Week 7 on the road at North Carolina. Your first ACC loss, though, and that's important as we continue to look through the rest of this schedule. Week 8, NC State, I give you the win there because I think you're going 1-1 in those 2 games against the North Carolina schools. So you're sitting at 5-2. On the road at Pitt. I'm giving you a win here. Pitt's not a good team. They're 3rd or 4th tier in the ACC, in my opinion. They're not Clemson. They're not Miami. They're not North Carolina. They're not Boston College. And they're not NC State. Therefore, you should win this game. I know it's on the road. I know it's at Pitt. Could be cold. We see weird things happen in these situations sometimes that I'm going to give Miami the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to assume that Miami doesn't have the epic drop off the cliff that they've had each of the last times they've put a decent season together over the last 15 years. You know, like we talked about 2017, 10-3, 2018, 6-7. or 7-6, whatever it was. I'm going to give Miami the benefit of the doubt that doesn't happen this year. Too many players returning, 20 starters, 19 starters returning out of the 21. Consistency at the head coaching position. You keep your OC. I don't see the fall off coming. I think you get the win on the road at Pitt. You come back home and play Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech, a team that I think is getting a little bit better year to year. Still a couple of years away, though, I think, from being anywhere close to mattering, even within the ACC. I've got you a win at home against the Nerds. And then the rivalry game on the road at Florida State. And as bad as North Carolina beat you last year, it had to feel good at the end of the season to know that you did the same to your rival, Florida State. You absolutely drubbed them last year. Florida State, in my opinion, not going to have a very good year this year. I'm not expecting much from them. They still have a lot of work to do. They've got quarterback issues in the same way that you have quarterback issues, right? They've got a good quarterback too, Mackenzie Milton. He's also coming off of an injury. Now, he's 2 years removed from his injury, so maybe he's a little further along rehab-wise, but the guy hasn't played it down in college football since 2018. He sat out all of 2019 and all of 2020. How rusty is he going to be? Not even certain he's going to be the starter. They may go with the same guy that started last year at Florida State. Regardless, they're just not on Miami's level right now. I know you have to play them there. I don't think it matters. You beat them a few times in a row. I'm going to give you another win there. You're owning Florida State right now. You get a big win against the Clown College. Then home against Virginia Tech, win. Fuentes is a disaster. This is going to be his last year there, most likely, in my opinion. It hasn't worked out. And that's a hire I was wrong about. I was high on Fuentes when he came out of Memphis. I thought he would have some success at Virginia Tech, and really he hasn't. Virginia has been the better team most years since Fuente was hired at Virginia Tech, and that's unacceptable at Virginia Tech. If they don't do something this year, this could be his last year. If they have another 4, 5, 6 win season, they're probably going to have to make a change there at head coach. I've got you beating the Hokies at home. And then the last game of the season on the road at Duke. And yes, it was fun to laugh at Miami because they beat Miami a couple of years in a row. I think 18-19, they beat Miami. It's not going to happen this year. I think you get a win on the road at Duke. Okay, so that's 10-2, okay? But before you start yelling at me, that's only one loss in the ACC, okay? So let's just think about that for a second. Forget about the Alabama game, okay? Alabama would beat anybody in America week 1. It's not an insult to lose that game. Now let's think about the North Carolina game, because I'm going to get a lot of comments that tell me I'm an idiot, and these people, these football brain-dead morons are just going to type 1980 in the comment section like that has anything to do with Miami playing on the road at North Carolina. North Carolina beat you last year, and they beat you bad. I get it, last year doesn't necessarily matter to this year, but you got to play them there. Mac Brown, listen, I like Manny Diaz. He appears to know what he's doing so far. We'll see how it works out with him being his own defensive coordinator this year. But in general, I think he's got Miami heading in the right direction. The recruiting has been pretty good. Mac Brown is better right now. Now, I'm not saying Manny Diaz will never be as good as Mac Brown, but if you compare Mac Brown to Manny Diaz right now, I give the nod to Mac Brown. Mac Brown inherited a 3-win team. He's turned it into a top 10 team in 3 years. Manny Diaz doing okay at Miami, not a top 10 team yet, though. Now, this would be an opportunity to prove that maybe Miami is a top 10 team. And like I said, I give Miami a great chance to win this game on the road at North Carolina. But even if you lose, according to my predictions anyway, that would be your only loss in the ACC, which means you can still win the division if North Carolina loses any 2 ACC games. I haven't done a North Carolina prediction video yet. Maybe I'll do it tomorrow. Since I did Miami today, so you don't have to wait to see if I think Miami or North Carolina is winning the division. I think Miami has probably just as good of a chance as North Carolina to win that division. It's hard to separate those two teams to me. Part of what I'm using to separate them is the Mac Brown factor, and it's impossible to ignore a 40-point beatdown last year where you gave up 600 and something yards rushing at home, and now you got to go there and play them on the road. That's my reasoning. I'm not trying to convince you that Miami has no chance to win that game. They clearly have a chance. They could go 11-1. They could go 11-1, lost to Bama, and they could reel off 11 straight wins and find themselves in the ACC title game. That 100% could happen. I don't see much worse, really, than 8-4. Even if you lose to Alabama and North Carolina, and then what? NC State. Who else on that schedule is going to beat you? The only way you end up with 4 losses is if it turns into a give-up season, which we have seen Miami fall into a couple of times over the last few years. Again, I'm betting against that this year. I think Manny Diaz can keep them focused. I think the fact that they have 19 starters back is going to prevent that nosedive that we've seen Miami take several times over the last 10 or 15 years. So let me know down below where you think I'm wrong. Do you think Miami will win the division? Let me know. If you're a Miami fan, I have a pretty good idea how you feel. If you're not a Miami fan, let me know how you feel too. Is it going to be Miami or North Carolina you think that wins this division in the ACC for the right to most likely take on Clemson in the ACC title game? Let me know. Did I get the record right or wrong? Let me know. Who else do you think has a chance to beat North Carolina? Let me know down below. And do me a favor, pick some of these prediction videos and share them somewhere if you can. You know, that's a great way to help the channel. Not just mine, any YouTuber that you enjoy watching. Every once in a while, share one of their videos somewhere. The best way for a YouTube channel to grow is to get new eyeballs on it. And one of the best ways to get new eyeballs on a video is to have your current subscribers share one of your videos with people that may not know who we are. So pick one of your favorite prediction videos, whether it's this one or a previous one that I've done, and share it somewhere. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Make a TikTok about it. Uncle Lou doesn't know anything about TikTok. Stop asking me about it. Anyway, shout out to all my huge Miami Hurricanes fans who are also, of course, huge Uncle Lou fans. The Miami fan loves Uncle Lou, don't they? Alonzo, don't forget to come over and get this treat I got for you too, buddy. Have a good morning.